When you lift a dumbbell at the gym, the feedback loop is just, well, it's instantaneous.
Right, you can literally see it happening.
Exactly. You look in the mirror, you watch your bicep contract, and you know immediately if your form is correct. You feel the burn right where you're supposed to.
It's very straightforward. But how do you train a muscle you can't even see?
Right. A muscle that you might not even know how to consciously control. Suddenly, that really straightforward workout feels like you're trying to drive a car while blindfolded.
And that invisible, highly complex musculature is the exact landscape of the pelvic floor. I mean, for decades, treating dysfunction in this area has relied so heavily on guesswork simply because we couldn't easily see or, accurately measure what was happening inside.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We're talking about the pelvic floor, which, if you picture it, is essentially this complex woven hammock of muscles and ligaments at the base of the pelvis that supports your internal organs.
Yeah, it's the foundational support system for the core.
Right. And specifically, we are looking at pelvic floor dysfunction, or PFD. Now, while it is a non-life-threatening condition, it completely upends the quality of life for roughly 25% of the female population. We are talking about everything from severe urinary incontinence to pelvic organ prolapse.
It is a massive public health issue. But because of the deeply personal nature of the condition, it's very often suffered in total silence. I mean, people just adapt their lives around the dysfunction instead of actually seeking a cure.
Yeah, they just accept it as normal. And when they do seek a cure, the historical standard advice has often just been a pamphlet, like a pamphlet and a suggestion to go home and do your Kegel exercises.
Which is incredibly frustrating for patients.
Oh, completely. So today we are asking a highly specific, fundamentally important question. Can putting a specific, objective numerical score on pelvic floor strength actually predict whether a treatment will work?
It's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of modern pelvic health.
We've got a fascinating stack of sources to help us unpack this today, too. We're looking at clinical trials, medical engineering studies on new vaginal dynamometers, a cutting-edge medarchs of paper on 3D spatial mapping, and guidelines from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE.
And the overarching theme across all of these sources is this massive shift in clinical approach. Moving from subjective feeling to actual precision measurement is the key to revolutionizing women's health in this area.
Yeah.
Basically, if you can measure something accurately, you can predict the outcome of treating it.
Right, which makes total sense. But let's start with the most basic question. Before we even get to the high-tech scoring systems, we have to talk about why we need a clinical score in the first place. Like, if someone's pelvic floor is weak, why can't a patient just evaluate their own strength at home?
Well, the short answer is that the human brain is remarkably bad at communicating with this specific muscle group.
Really? Just this group?
Mostly, yeah. There is a massive gap between perception and reality. To really understand this, we should look at a clinical study from our sources called the Pelvitrust trial. This involved 221 healthy pregnant women.
Okay, 221.
Right. And at the very first stage of measurement, the researchers asked the women in the intervention group a really simple question. Do you believe you are correctly contracting your pelvic floor muscles?
I mean, I'm assuming that since they are adults controlling their own bodies, most of them felt pretty confident that they were doing it right.
Overwhelmingly confident. 88% of these women believed they were performing the contraction perfectly.
Okay, 88%.
But then the researchers performed an objective visual and physical inspection, and they found that only 68% were actually contracting the correct muscles.
Oh, wow. That is a huge disconnect.
It is.
That's a full 20% gap between what the brain thinks is happening and what the muscle is actually doing. If you've ever stood in front of a mirror and tried to teach a kid how to wiggle their ears, it sounds a lot like that.
That's actually a brilliant comparison.
Right, because they scrunch up their whole face, they hold their breath, and they fully believe they are wiggling their ears. But you look at them and they are literally just raising their eyebrows. Without the mirror, they have no idea what muscles they're actually firing.
Exactly. That analogy perfectly captures the issue of proprioception.
Proprioception?
Yeah, proprioception is your brain's awareness of where your body parts are and what they're doing. In the brain's sensory map, which is sometimes called the homunculus areas, like your hand and your lips, take up massive amounts of real estate. You have incredible fine motor control there.
Because we use them for everything, all the time.
Exactly. But the internal pelvic muscles take up very little space in that map. They operate largely as an automated support system, until something breaks down. And that perception gap gets dramatically worse if someone already has dysfunction.
How much worse?
Well, research from Mazur Bialy and colleagues noted that up to 70% of women with PFD cannot perform a correct contraction on their own.
70%. So if a doctor skips the clinical assessment, doesn't establish a baseline score, and just tells a patient to do Kegels.
You're prescribing physical therapy for the eyebrows when the ears are the actual problem.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the patient might go home and diligently practice for months, squeezing their glutes or their abdominal muscles, completely exhausting themselves while the pelvic floor continues to weaken. I mean, if you don't know your starting point and you don't have a reliable way to verify that you are firing the correct muscle, the treatment will inevitably fail.
Which completely justifies why a baseline objective score is absolutely necessary. We just can't trust our own perception. Which I guess leads us to figure out how clinicians actually capture this score. Because looking through our sources, the evolution of measuring pelvic floor strength has been a pretty bumpy ride.
Very bumpy. It used to be heavily reliant on a doctor's personal judgment. Historically, the gold standard has been something called the Modified Oxford Scale, or MOS.
In MOS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a digital palpation test. A clinician literally inserts 2 fingers into the vaginal canal and asks the patient to squeeze. The clinician then grades that squeeze on a scale from 0, meaning no contraction at all, to 5, which represents a strong, sustained contraction.
I mean, that sounds incredibly practical, but also deeply flawed. Like, how do you standardize what a level 3 squeeze feels like across thousands of different doctors?
The short answer is you can't. That subjective feeling is its primary limitation. The test-retest reliability can be quite low.
Right, because everyone's hands are different.
Exactly. Imagine a patient goes in on a Tuesday and Dr. A grades her a 3. 2 weeks later, she sees Dr. B, who grades her a 2. Did the patient actually lose muscle strength, or does Dr. B just have stronger fingers and a totally different personal baseline for what constitutes a strong squeeze?
You'd have no way to know. The score is hopelessly tied to the human recording it.
Which is exactly why medical engineering stepped in to remove the human bias. The first major wave of technology was the perineometer. These devices were designed to measure pressure inside the vaginal cavity, usually recorded in centimeters of water.
Wait, hold on. Centimeters of water. This is where the physics gets a little confusing for me as a layman. The sources suggest these early pressure machines were highly flawed. But I mean, if I squeeze a muscle around a sensor, I'm creating pressure. Why is measuring that pressure a bad way to score strength?
Well, because of how pressure behaves inside a closed, fluid-filled space like the abdominal cavity.
Okay, I'm trying to picture that.
Think of it this way. Imagine holding a balloon inside a small box. If you squeeze the balloon directly with your hand, the pressure inside goes up.
Right.
But if you just push down heavily on the lid of the box, the pressure inside the balloon also goes up, even though you aren't squeezing it directly.
Ah, I see. So if a patient is trying to do a pelvic floor contraction, but they accidentally hold their breath and bear down with their stomach muscles like they're doing a heavy crunch, they are pushing down on the lid of the box.
Exactly. And that increases the intra-abdominal pressure. The perineometer registers that spike in ambient pressure and spits out a high score. It gives a massive false positive.
Wow, so the machine is basically being tricked.
Completely.
Yeah.
It tells the doctor the pelvic floor is incredibly strong, when in reality, the patient's abdominal muscles are doing all the heavy lifting, and the pelvic floor might actually be completely failing.
So to get an accurate score that actually predicts success, you have to filter out the cheating. You have to measure the pull of the muscle itself, not just the air pressure in the room around it.
Which brings us to vaginal dynamometers. Unlike perineometers that measure ambient pressure, a dynamometer measures actual, direct mechanical force, and it records it in newtons.
Force instead of pressure.
Yes. It is a specialized speculum equipped with mechanical inductive displacement sensors.
Okay, let's break down mechanical inductive displacement for anyone who doesn't design medical equipment for a living. What is that actually doing?
Think of it like a highly sensitive microscopic spring scale. It doesn't care about the general pressure in the cavity. It only registers a score if a muscle physically grabs the device and displaces or pulls the sensor.
Oh, that's clever.
Right. It completely isolates the direct active mechanical force generated exclusively by the pelvic floor muscles.
That eliminates the false positives entirely. If you bear down with your abs, the sensor won't move and your score won't go up.
And the data validating this is incredibly strong. A study of 152 women demonstrated that these dynamometers have an intra-rater reliability score of 0.942.
Which is exactly.
That is nearly flawless consistency. Furthermore, it easily and objectively distinguished women with incontinence from continent women. Around 72% of the incontinent women had previously scored a subjective 0 to 2 on the old Oxford finger test.
Right.
The dynamometer mapped exactly to that weakness, but it replaced the doctor's guesswork with hard, objective numerical precision.
That alone is a massive leap forward. But looking at the MedAccess study in our stack, the technology has already evolved past just giving one single overall score, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because we are now looking at portable, multi-channel dynamic measuring systems.
This is truly the cutting edge of diagnostics. Instead of just delivering one aggregate number for the entire pelvic floor, this new system features multiple sensors arranged in an array. It records the unique strength distributions across different specific areas of the pelvic floor.
Like mapping it out.
Yeah, exactly. Areas like the vaginal sphincter, the puborectalis, which acts like a sling around the rectum, and the pubicothujus muscles, which form the main hammock supporting the organs.
It's essentially taking a single score and turning it into a full 3D topographical map of the entire pelvic region.
When you look at this evolution from a doctor's fingers to easily fooled pressure sensors to precise force dynamometers, and finally to 3D spatial mapping, you see a field completely transforming. We finally have a highly accurate, objective way to measure what is happening in a place we cannot easily see.
So we have the map, we have a crystal clear objective score. How does that number actually act as a crystal ball? Let's connect this to our core question. How does having this score predict whether a treatment is going to work?
The predictive power lies in how the score dictates the specific dosage and targets the exact subtype of dysfunction.
Dosage, like medication.
More like dosage of physical therapy.
Hmm?
See this in action. We can look at a 10-week MDPI study focusing on aerobic and resistance training for postpartum women. In this trial, the patient's baseline comprehensive strength score strictly dictated their medical treatment plan.
Meaning the doctors didn't just guess how much therapy someone needed based on how they felt. The score made the decision.
Correct. The researchers used a 100-point scale. If a woman scored below 60 points, the score predicted she would require 2 to 3 full courses of clinical pelvic floor rehabilitation.
And a full course means what? Going to a clinic.
Yes, intense, supervised sessions with a physical therapist.
And if she scored in the middle,
Yeah.
say between 60 and 80 points.
The data indicated she would likely only need 1 to 2 courses to restore function. But the most interesting group were the women who scored above 80 points.
What happened with them?
For them, the score predicted they didn't need intensive clinical rehab at all. They could simply maintain their pelvic health with daily, unsupervised Kegel exercises at home.
That's amazing. It acts as a highly specific GPS for physical therapy. Instead of handing every single patient the same generic pamphlet and telling them to, drive generally north, the score tells the clinician the exact distance they need to travel.
Exactly.
It prevents undertreating severe cases and overtreating mild ones.
And the 3D mapping technology takes that GPS analogy even further. It doesn't just tell you the distance, it tells you exactly which roads are blocked and which bridges are out.
Oh, I like that. Unpack that for us. How does a 3D map predict the specific subtype of dysfunction a patient has?
Well, we have to look at the composition of the muscles themselves. The pelvic floor is made up of different types of muscle fibers. You have slow twitch fibers, which are responsible for endurance. They provide constant all-day support to hold your organs up against gravity.
Okay, slow twitch for endurance.
Right. Then you have fast twitch fibers. These are designed to contract violently and quickly to handle sudden physical stress like when you sneeze, cough, or jump.
So if a patient leaks a little bit every time they sneeze, that's a failure of the fast twitch fibers. They aren't reacting quickly enough to the sudden impact.
Yes, exactly. Now, using the 3D mapping system, doctors can identify highly specific, localized defects in these fiber types. For instance, the study highlighted a subgroup of postpartum women dealing with abdominal wall obesity. When clinicians looked at their 3D maps, they found that these women specifically suffered from weak, slow-twitch muscle fibers.
Let me see if I can trace the logic there. If you have abdominal wall obesity, there is a constant, heavier downward weight pressing on the pelvic floor 24 hours a day. It's like putting double the traffic on a suspension bridge, right?
That's exactly right.
So the cables that provide the constant support, the slow twitch fibers, are essentially burning out from exhaustion.
That is a perfect visualization of the mechanics at play. So predicting treatment success in this scenario relies entirely on the 3D map. If the map tells you the slow twitch fibers are the failing structural element, you do not prescribe rapid, fast twitch Kegels.
Because that won't fix the bridge.
Right. Instead, you prescribe targeted, long-hold endurance training to rebuild that foundational, constant support.
That is so specific. Our sources also mention another specific subtype that the map can find called UVO, or unclosed vaginal orifice.
Yes. In patients presenting with UVO, the outer gateway isn't sealing properly, which can lead to structural weakness and a higher vulnerability to infections. The 3D map reveals that for these patients, the weakness isn't global across the whole pelvic floor. It is highly localized to the perineal area near the external orifice.
So again, the score dictates the exact treatment. You don't just tell them to squeeze everything. You give them targeted exercises, specifically focusing on contracting that outer muscular ring.
Exactly.
The GPS says take the next right. But what I found absolutely fascinating in the MedActive study is that this mapping technology can find these defects before the patient even feels a single symptom.
This represents perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of advanced clinical scoring. The sensors in these devices are phenomenally sensitive. They are able to detect pressure changes down to a resolution of 1/10,000th of a centimeter of water.
That's microscopic.
It is. And because of that extreme fidelity, the system can identify subclinical defects.
Subclinical meaning the cracks in the bridge are there, but the bridge hasn't started sagging yet. The map sees the microscopic muscle weakness long before the patient experiences actual incontinence or a prolapse.
Exactly. It allows for early warning and primary prevention. You are essentially predicting the future so you can change it before the damage becomes structural.
We've established that the score is a brilliant tool for prescribing the correct treatment. But I want to talk about actual human outcomes.
Sure.
Because a number going up on a dynamometer screen is great for a medical chart, but does it actually translate to a better daily life for the patient? Sometimes clinical data doesn't match the lived experience. When the score improves, what actually happens?
To answer that, we have to return to the results of that 10-week exercise prescription study. After 10 weeks of targeted, score-dictated training, the overall strength scores of the women jumped by nearly 50%.
Which is a massive increase in raw power.
It is. But researchers know that raw numbers don't tell the whole story, so they applied a statistical measurement called Cohen's d. This is a way to calculate the effect size, or the practical, real-world significance of a clinical result.
Like how much it actually matters to a person.
Right. An effect size of 0.2 is considered small, while anything over 0.8 is considered a large effect that the patient will noticeably feel in their daily life.
And what did the Cohen's d show for these women?
The targeted training resulted in a large increase in the maximum capability of their fast-twitch muscle fibers. They could suddenly handle those sudden sneezes, coughs, and laughs without failing.
That's huge.
But even more impressively, it showed a very large effect size, well over 1.0, in the endurance of their slow-twitch muscle fibers. Their foundational support practically transformed.
And this wasn't just researchers analyzing numbers in a vacuum, right? They asked the women how they actually felt using a validated quality of life questionnaire. The pelvic floor distress inventory, or PFDI-20?
Yes, and the human results were incredibly compelling. As their objective strength scores went up, their daily physical symptoms dropped by a full third.
That's amazing. We also have to acknowledge the psychological toll here, which the study measured. Living with pelvic floor dysfunction is, it's exhausting.
It really is.
It's the constant hypervigilance. It's mapping out every single bathroom when you go to a new restaurant. It's avoiding playing on the trampoline with your kids or altering your entire wardrobe because you are terrified of a leak.
The mental burden is immense, leading to high levels of anxiety and social withdrawal. But the study found that as the muscle strength scores objectively improved, the psychological distress scores dropped just as dramatically as the physical symptoms.
That is genuinely life-changing for these patients. And it's not just this one study proving the concept. The NICE guidelines, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, back up the power of this targeted training as well, don't they?
They do. The NICE guidelines take it a step further by confirming that targeted pelvic floor muscle training doesn't just improve symptoms. It leads to actual morphological improvements that you can visibly see on an ultrasound.
Wait, morphological, meaning that the physical shape and location of the internal organs actually changes?
Yes, literally. For example, if a patient has an early-stage pelvic organ prolapse, where the bladder or uterus has begun to drop into the vaginal canal due to a weak hammock, targeted physiotherapy can result in the visible elevation of the bladder neck.
Wow.
As the muscle score improves, the internal organs are literally lifted back up into a healthy anatomical position.
That is incredible to visualize. But, I always want to keep our deep dives grounded in reality. In all of this data, is there any part of the clinical score that doesn't easily improve? Does the machine ever tell us that a certain type of dysfunction is going to be exceptionally hard to fix?
The data is very transparent about its limitations, actually. In that same 10-week study, the researchers didn't just track contraction strength. They also tracked the pre-resting and post-resting stages.
What does that mean exactly?
This measures how well the muscle relaxes before a squeeze and how fully it releases tension after a squeeze.
Ah, because a healthy muscle shouldn't just be strong, it needs to be pliable.
Precisely.
If a muscle is constantly clenched, it's just a different type of dysfunction. It's like someone who grinds their teeth all day. Telling the jaw to just relax is often much harder than telling it to bite down.
That is a very accurate comparison. Chronic pelvic tension is notoriously difficult to treat. And the study found that while strength improved massively, the effect sizes for those resting stages were incredibly small. There were only very minor improvements in resting tension over the 10 weeks.
So what does that tell a doctor looking at the score?
It indicates that learning to release a chronically tense pelvic floor requires a much longer duration of training than simply building strength. The score predicts success, but it also humbly sets realistic expectations.
Right.
It tells the clinician when 10 weeks isn't enough or when they might need to pivot to a different intervention entirely, like biofeedback therapy, to basically teach the brain how to let go.
So bringing all of this together, what is the ultimate takeaway here? We started by asking if pelvic floor strength scores can predict treatment success. Based on the mountain of clinical evidence, the answer is an undeniable yes, but only if we're using the right instruments.
Exactly. We have to move past the era of subjective finger tests and the inherent flaws of self-perception. As long as clinicians utilize objective force-measuring tools like dynamometers and multi-channel 3D spatial mapping, they can identify the exact structural failure.
And perfectly tailor a rehabilitation program to the unique needs of that specific patient. If you or someone in your life is dealing with pelvic floor issues, the most important thing to know is that you do not have to guess. You don't have to sit at home doing generic exercises, wondering if you are part of that 20% who is wiggling their eyebrows instead of their ears. Real objective measurement tools exist today. They can map your baseline, predict your optimal treatment path, track your progress without bias, and ultimately help you get your quality of life back.
And, looking at the horizon of this technology raises one final provocative question.
Oh, lay it on me.
We know that the newest 3D strength mapping sensors are so sensitive that they can identify subclinical pelvic floor weakness well before symptoms like incontinence or prolapse ever manifest.
Right, the ultimate early warning system.
So will routine pelvic floor strength mapping one day become a standard preventative measure in women's healthcare? Could a quick 3D pelvic scan become as routine and expected as getting a dental x-ray to check for cavities or taking a blood pressure reading?
That's a great point.
It would allow us to structurally reinforce the pelvic floor before the dysfunction ever truly begins.
Imagine a world where we treat the structural integrity of the pelvic floor with the same aggressive preventative care as our teeth. That is a truly fascinating thought to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.